And, he's got this problem that he's having these reoccurring nightmares to him. And be honest with you, as we read these verses, if you were dreaming this all the time, you'd probably feel the same way. So we're going to look at Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And notice what happens beginning in verse 31, chapter 2. The Bible says, "My king, as you were watching, a colossal statue appeared. That statue, tall and dazzling, was standing in front of you in its appearance and was terrifying. The head of the statue was pure gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its stomach and thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron, and its feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. As you were watching, a stone broke off without a hand touching it, struck the statue on its feet of iron and fired clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the fired clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, and not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." Now, I got to be honest, folks. If I was dreaming that kind of dream, I'd be a little restless too. Let's just be honest. I'm reading this, and it says there's this tall, dazzling statue. When I think of that, what was pictured, I think of a big toy soldier. I don't know about you, but it's just like, there's this big, huge toy soldier that he's having this dream about. But he's very descriptive about the parts of this body on this statue. And it's important for us to understand what God was doing. God was using a dream by Nebuchadnezzar to really give Daniel a glimpse, if you will, into all of the major civilizations yet to come, the world empires yet to come. And so it's like a panoramic view, and God is using a pagan king, which is kind of interesting to me. In fact, as we study all four parts of this body, we're going to find that all four of them are Gentile empires that had rule and reign over the Jews. Remember, the ones that were God's chosen people. So let's look at the first empire that he spoke of. It's the Babylonian Empire. Beginning in chapter 2, verse 36, it says, "This was a dream now that we will tell the king in the interpretation. Your Majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty and power and strength and glory. Wherever people live, or wild animals, or birds of the air, he has handed them over to you and made you ruler over them all. You are," look at this, "the head of gold." So all of a sudden, he says, I've got good news and I've got bad news to you, King Nebuchadnezzar. The good news is this dream that you're having is that the gold head, that's you. That represents your empire. You are now in control. You are like the king of the earth at this point. You're over everything. And so Nebuchadnezzar, he could really look at him and say, tonight you can go to sleep and you can rest because you don't have to worry for a little while. The bad news is, King Nebuchadnezzar, there's another empire that's coming that will crush you. And so he says the first empire is to have a head of gold, which is the Babylonian Empire. The next empire is the Medo-Persian Empire. That's in verse 39. It says, "After you, there will rise another kingdom inferior to yours." That occurred in about 539 BC. All this is backed up by secular history, not only the Bible, folks, but by secular history. And so the Medo-Persians come in, and there's a dual monarchy in this empire. And the Bible talks about that. So they reign for about 200 years. So that's the second one. And the Bible says that they're like silver, two arms, a chest of silver and two arms of silver. And so that's the description of the second empire. The third empire that's mentioned is the Grecian Empire. The Bible says a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule the whole earth. Well, what is that? That's talking about Greece. And all of us who went through history or maybe to college, we know all about the Grecian Empire because there was a guy by the name of Alexander the Great. And we remember the story about Alexander the Great. He conquered the known world at that time. Daniel says there's going to be 4 empires. There's going to be the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. There's going to be the Grecian Empire. But the fourth empire to come, that he's mentioned in this dream that's going to come true, that's already come true. In verse 40, and the fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron. For iron crushes and shatters everything like iron that smashes it. It will crush and smash all the others. As you study, of course, the Roman Empire, you know that they literally ruled with an iron fist. There's nobody like the Roman Empire. They just devoured everything and everyone. And all of us are aware of the Roman Empire. Just if we read the Bible, we know that they were the ones who were in power when Jesus came upon this earth. It was the Romans that decided to get together with the Jews. You remember the Jewish leaders. And I know this is hard for us to understand, and you're trying to figure out this big old plan of God and will of God, but it was actually the religious leaders, Jewish religious leaders, that got together with the Roman government and decided, how can we get rid of Jesus? And, of course, we call that the cross. But we all know as believers that he went voluntarily, but he used the Roman government. He used those who were supposed to be the religious leaders of that day. And so the Roman Empire today, existed for many years. And it was split after a period of time. And that's probably why it's mentioned as, the two legs of iron. But now there's another dream. And I'm trying to give you a lot of stuff, and it's hard to do this in 30 minutes, but there's another dream in Daniel chapter 7. And this dream, it's not Nebuchadnezzar's dream. This is a dream that God gives Daniel himself. And it's almost lines up. It's the same thing as mentioned in Daniel chapter 2, except it's from a different angle. It would be like if we were at a wedding and we hired two photographers to come to the wedding. If you hired two photographers and there was the same bride and the same groom that was on the stage, but two photographers, you had different pictures. Well, that's kind of what Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 is like, because Daniel has a dream. And now his dream is connected to chapter 2. And let me just share that with you just to let you know if you decide to get into this stuff. And it's heavy stuff, I've got to be honest with you. But Daniel chapter 2, when it talks about the Babylonian Empire, talks about the head of gold. When you go to Daniel chapter 7, it is depicted as the lion. When you go to Daniel chapter 2 and you talk about the Medo-Persian Empire, which is the chest and arms of silver, in Daniel chapter 7, it's depicted as the bear. When you go to Daniel chapter 2, it talks about that there's the bronze, the belly and thighs of bronze. But when you go to Daniel chapter 7, it's the leopard. In Daniel chapter 2, the dream from Nebuchadnezzar, and it has the legs of iron. When you go to Daniel chapter 7, it is the terrifying beast. So when you read chapter 2 and you see Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and you go to Daniel chapter 7, they line up. It's just a different dream. Same thing. Now here's what's really interesting. At the end of both of their dreams that they talk about, there's 10 things still remaining. If you remember in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, there were 10 toes remaining. In Daniel chapter 7, there are 10 horns remaining. Pastor, what is that all about? Well, what that's saying is there's still a kingdom to come. There's still another empire to come. It is the last empire. Most conservative Bible theologians believe it's going to be the revived Roman Empire, which I tend to agree with. And so if that is true, that means there's still something to come. 80% of the dream, both dreams have already been completed if you were looking at it as a 5-part dream. To be honest with you, when you look at all the pieces that are on the puzzle at this point, I would say like 95% of all the dreams, both dreams have been completed. And so we're just waiting on the last world empire. So, when you stop and think about that, you say, well, when is that going to come? Well, in Daniel chapter 2, it talks about this. It says, you saw the feet and the toes, partly of a potter's fired clay and partly of iron. It will be divided into a kingdom. Though some of the strength of the iron will be in it, you saw the iron mixed with clay. And that the toes of the feet were part of iron, part clay. Part of the kingdom will be strong and part will be brittle. So, Daniel in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar says there's going to be, these 10 toes